Is authoritarianism the cure for the coronavirus? Some people think so, and here's why that's stupid. Welcome back to China Uncensored, I'm Chris Chappell. The deadly coronavirus pandemic continues to spread around the world, or as I'm calling it, the CCP coronavirus, or CCP virus for short, because the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up is what allowed it to spread around the world. Globally, more than 500,000 people have been infected and at least 20,000 people have died. I know this is a scary time, but please, don't panic. There are a few simple things that you can do to keep yourself and your family safe. The best way to defend yourself from the coronavirus is to wash your hands frequently for 20 seconds. Practice social distancing, and most importantly, implement brutal authoritarian rule. That's right, your pathetic freedoms and liberty will be your downfall. There's a message being pushed that China's authoritarian response to the coronavirus works, and Western democracies just can't handle it. Or as the New York Times put it, that's just the price of an open society. This narrative obviously ignores the fact that the coronavirus became a pandemic because the Chinese Communist Party covered it up and allowed it to spread around the world. #CCP Virus. And it also ignores the fact that Taiwan, a free and open society run by Chinese people, has done a better job than any other country at fighting the CCP virus. But please, ignore those facts. The good news is not everyone believes the CCP's lies. In this case, Vox gets it. But a huge number of people are still being fooled. Some people are even suggesting that since the West is so bad at handling the coronavirus, it's time to shelter in China. To clarify, this article is not suggesting you physically go and shelter in China, which you can't do anyway since they've closed the border to all foreigners. No, it's suggesting you shelter your money in China, specifically buy Chinese government bonds. Don't do that. I can only assume that the writer of that article has been reading too much Chinese state-run media. See, according to my favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times, we need to learn from China. So, let's take a look at what the People's Republic of China did to deal with the coronavirus, starting with how Chinese officials rounded people up and threw them into mass quarantine camps. And if people went outside without a mask, they did this, and this, and this. This guy didn't wear a mask, so they tied him to a pillar, still without a mask. These ethnic Uyghurs weren't supposed to go outside, so officials hung signs from their necks calling them dogs, which is so wrong. I mean, if they were dogs, they'd be allowed to go outside. Other Chinese officials thought that it would be a good idea to weld potentially infected families into their homes. And of course, who could forget the good old rounding up people on the streets and shoving them into boxes? That makes being forced to the ground and sprayed with disinfectant seem less bad. Okay, that's all horrible, but it worked, right? Wrong. And not just because you can't cure the coronavirus by beating it out of someone. It's also because the Communist Party has lied all along about how many coronavirus cases China has. Just 2.5 months ago, they were clearly lying about the coronavirus, even claiming it couldn't spread human to human. Why would anyone think that the Chinese Communist Party is telling the truth now about how many people have the coronavirus? More people have died from the CCP virus in Italy than China? Come on, BBC, no. That is so stupid. Why would you believe China's official data? China has a lot more cases that are not being reported. And on top of that, we're about to see a second wave of infections in China. I did a whole episode about that. Now, I can understand why Chinese state-run media have praised how China responded to the coronavirus. I can even understand why the horribly corrupt World Health Organization has praised China's response.
If I had COVID-19, I want to be treated in China.
That's nuts. Unless He likes being held down. But more likely, it's because the WHO is horribly corrupt. Mr. I like it when cops sit on me also said hundreds of thousands of people in China did not get COVID-19 because of this aggressive response. Don't worry, the WHO is basing that on data provided by Chinese scientists. And those scientists could be lying or providing false data given to them by people who are lying. Here in the West, the media usually love to accuse people in power of lying. But somehow, they're not picking up on it when the Chinese regime is lying. Or they're just being stupid. Like this Bloomberg headline. Coronavirus is making China's model look better and better. That headline was eventually changed, but only slightly. And here's Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press, who apparently does not know what a leading question is.
How uncomfortable is it that perhaps China's authoritarian ways did prevent this? Meaning, had China been a free and open society, this might have spread faster?
You know, in the beginning, Chuck, they were not as transparent as we would have liked.
But their extreme quarantines, has that worked?
Well, you know, it has. I mean, that's not the usual thing you do. Their efforts have been draconian, something we never would be able to do here. But even though there's a lot of things that have unintended negative consequences of that, I think it did help dampen what would have been a broader Chinese. Wuhan was terrible, but I think they prevented a broader spread.
And Mother Jones reminds us that was because China was able to build hospitals very quickly, one of many lessons we can learn from China. In Wuhan alone, Chinese workers constructed, from scratch, 2 new facilities to hold an additional 2,600 hospital beds in a matter of days. I mean, yes, technically you can't build a hospital in a few days, and those are really just glorified quarantine centers, or you can turn a hotel into a quarantine center until it collapses. But details. Overall, it was an enormous success, according to an expert from the New York Times on The Rachel Maddow Show.
China has had enormous success in beating down its epidemic. We see the drone shots from these cities and we think, ooh, lockdown, it looks terrible, there's no traffic on the street. That's not the point of what they did. They had to do that in order to introduce the measures they were going to take that were actually going to fight the epidemic. And that is testing, 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 testing. If you go into any building, your temperature is taken. I came into this building, nobody took my temperature. So people were literally quickly taken away from their families to these giant gymnasiums or stadiums where they were not concentration camps. They were beds, there, and they even had dance classes in these things. It's not a bad policy.
Not a bad policy at all. So I know what you're thinking. How soon can the rest of us have China's successful model for battling the coronavirus? Soon. Newswire service AFP is suggesting that China's model should be used for the rest of the world. And you know how the Chinese regime has been developing a surveillance state using social media apps like WeChat? We should have that too. Because apps like WeChat have helped enforce the restrictions because they allow the government to keep track of people's movements and even stop people with confirmed infections from traveling. And WeChat has even stopped people from doing really dangerous things like talking openly with each other. I know, China's authoritarian model sounds great, but there's one thing we need to watch out for: authoritarianism. At least when it comes to President Trump. Yes, the same media organizations that are praising China and begging for Chinese authoritarianism to come to the United States are also warning that Trump will use the coronavirus as an excuse to bring authoritarianism to the United States. Look, the liberty we enjoy in the United States was hard-won. Brave men and women gave their lives for the freedoms we now take for granted. There will always be some threat to the country, whether it's terrorism or a pandemic. But should we really throw all that away for a little bit of security? Absolutely. Which is why I'm proud to announce my campaign for Supreme Leader of these United States for life. Trust me, you're gonna love it. Now I'll answer a question from a fan who supports China Uncensored on Patreon. After all, YouTube would have run us out of business with the constant demonetization if it weren't for their support. But first, did you know YouTube has been secretly unsubscribing people from the show? take a moment to make sure you're still subscribed. And if you haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? All right, today's question comes from Kevin McInerney. Could this end the CCP? Kevin is asking about the coronavirus, or the CCP virus, as I'm now calling it. Now that's the million-dollar question. Certainly the CCP virus has shook the Chinese regime. The massive cover-up, the silencing of whistleblowing doctors, the forced quarantines, that's got a lot of Chinese people fighting mad at the Chinese regime. But the impact on the economy might be the most devastating part. The CCP has legitimized its rule with the promise that it helps keep China stable and rich. So, please put up with all the brutal authoritarianism. If that's no longer true, people might not want to put up with the brutal authoritarianism. For more on the economic impact of the CCP virus, check out my recent interview with China expert Gordon Chang, a regime ender, Coronavirus Impact on China. Nevertheless, the CCP has managed to weather 70 years of near constant catastrophe. And in the last 30 years or so, it's been thanks largely to help from supporters in the West throwing money at the CCP. So, who knows what the straw that breaks the camel's back will be? Thanks for your question, Kevin, and thank you for watching. Remember, YouTube has been demonetizing almost all of our videos. They'd have run us out of business if it weren't for support from fans like you who contribute through the crowdfunding website Patreon. I call them the China Uncensored 50-Cent Army. If you'd like to hear your question answered at the end of an episode, join the China Uncensored 50-Cent Army by going to patreon.com/China Uncensored. Thanks for watching China Uncensored. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.